sat together in the park as the evening sky got dark. She looked at him and he felt a spark tingle to his bones. First lady felt alone and wished that he'd gone straight and watched out for a simple twist of fate.
Blood on the Tracks has been probably one of the most influential albums of all time. Anyone that's ever picked up an acoustic guitar has been influenced by this record.
Blood on the Tracks is just sounds to me like American acoustic music, and that's why it sounds like a classic. There's something kind of timeless about it. It's the 70s, but it could be any time.
After 10, 15 listenings to you know, the Beatles' White Album, I think I've got it figured out. And after 100 listens to Blood on the Tracks, I don't think I've got it figured out. And to me, that's the difference.
I think it gave a kind of false credence to other people who thought that pouring out pain was all it was about. And as I've been trying to say, Blood on the Tracks is more than just about listening to a pain of separation. It's about much more.
In Like a Rolling Stone, you're pretty hard on the girl, and in Positively Fourth Street, you're pretty hard on the supposed friend. Are you hard on them because you want to torment them, or because you want to change their lives and make them know themselves?
I want to needle them.
Who's Mr. Jones?
Mr. Jones, I'm not going to tell you his first name. I get sued.
What does he do for a living?
He's a pin boy. He also wears suspenders.
I think Dylan was this mythical creature who revolutionized music, rock music, pop music, folk music, everything in 5 years, you know. Between 1962 and 1966, he made 7 albums. Each one was radically different from the last. He completely changed folk music. He made folk music political. He changed rock music. He made rock music poetic and mysterious and allegorical and mystical. He did all this extraordinary work in just 5 years, and then he exploded. He vanished. He had a motorbike crash and he vanished.
But you don't understand. That's what you're gonna say when you get home. Because something's happening here, but you don't know what it is. Oh, you, Mr. John.
The motorcycle accident and the degree to which Dylan was hurt is something that's debated endlessly. The motorcycle accident, in its effect on Dylan's myth, was extraordinary. In fact, it would have been a great PR stunt if it had been set up for that. The motorcycle accident was reported in the most grotesque terms. Dylan was reported in the New York Post as being paralysed. He was reported elsewhere as being a vegetable. He was alive, but he was brain dead. He was reported in various places as being so badly disfigured, the reason he was hiding was he didn't want people to see his scars and he would never return to the stage. And nobody contradicted this.
Dylan hated being called a spokesman for a generation. He felt it was just a terrible millstone to hang around anybody's neck. And with him, it was hung around his neck, well, when he was about 20 years old. And he felt it, dragging him down, and he just shucked it off. Said, no, I'm not. He didn't mind actually being, admired for his achievements, but he wasn't going to lead anybody. And all through his life, he's avoided trying to lead people anywhere. And to a certain extent, his removal with the motorbike accident in 1966 was quite fortuitous for him. It enabled him to kind of just step back from what was a very damaging lifestyle and all the expectations that had been laid upon him, and just get away from that.
Ironically, although people think of the motorcycle accident as being this huge gap in Dylan's career, Dylan was actually recording the seminal Basement tape material 9 months after the accident and was recording John Wesley Harding 15 months after the accident. So in fact 1967, the year after Dylan's motorcycle accident, was probably his most creative year ever.
He came back with this album that was so simple and so acoustic and was recorded in 1967, the same year as Sgt. Pepper, the same year as Electric Ladyland. And yet it sounded like it was recorded in 1867. It sounded like something from the American backwoods. And it has no references to contemporary society at all, and yet the whole thing is suffused with a sense of what was happening to American culture in the 60s, how it's tearing itself apart.
If any other artist but Dylan had released John Wesley Harding, it would be considered the absolute pinnacle of their career. It never appears in top 5 lists of Bob Dylan albums.
John Wesley Harding came as a big surprise to Dylan fans, in as much as Dylan had set off the whole psychedelic era really came from Blonde on Blonde. That's possibly being unfair to many other artists, but Dylan's influence at the time, it's impossible to overstate how big his influence was, and people were trying to top Blonde on Blonde. And you had fantastically creative artists like Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys doing Smile, and then hearing the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's and Giving Up. And even the Rolling Stones, I mean, you know, a rock and roll, rhythm and blues, hard down rocking band, they went all flowery and all this nonsense as well. And the whole world was going psychedelic pop, spacey albums, and Dylan came out with a sparse, pared down John Wesley Harding.
When John Wesley Harding came out in 1968, it was a big shock to the rock audience, which, whilst he had been away, had turned paisley and become hippie and so on. So it was all bright colours and psychedelic album sleeves everywhere else. He came out with something which had a beige colour album sleeve with a black and white photo on the cover, and the songs inside were recorded at such a quiet level that you could hardly hear them unless you turned your amplifier right up. And they were all very kind of diffident, quiet songs with a lot of biblical imagery in, which again didn't jive very well with the prevailing attitudes of the time.
I once held her in my arms. She said she would always stay. But I was cruel, I treated her like a fool. I threw it all away.
He then made this very corny Nashville record called Nashville Skyline, very corny Nashville love songs.
If John Wesley Harding was a bit of a shock, then Nashville Skyline was just almost like heresy when that came out, because it was this very conservative music, country music, which no one was listening to at the time. Nobody hip was listening to it at the time.
People were marching against Vietnam, there was riots in Paris and everything. Bob Dylan was the leader of the revolution and he was singing, "Oh, me, country Paris." But the whole idea of Dylan being this kind of bucolic, happy country boy, at the time was shocking. It's quite charming now, but at the time it was shocking. What Dylan had done to the folkies by going electric, he did to the rockers by going to Nashville Skyline. The problem with Nashville Skyline was, actually I think it's a very good album. It's got a wonderful sound to it, but the problems with it were Dylan's voice had changed. He didn't sound like Bob Dylan. He didn't sound like Bob Dylan at all. And when asked about this, he said it was because he'd given up smoking in one of his kind of wry ways of fielding questions. The opening track was a duet with the great Johnny Cash, with whom Dylan had actually done quite a bit of work, and they seemed to pick the worst possible version to put on the album.
If you're traveling to the North Country Fair, where the winds hit heavy on the borderline, remember me to one who lives there, for she once was a true love of mine.
He re-recorded Girl from the North Country with Johnny Cash on Nashville Skyline in a kind of an unusual duet, shall we say. But he originally recorded it on Freewheelin', his second album. The version with Johnny Cash was part of a whole session he did, which there's a bootleg available of the whole thing, where they're going through a bunch of songs, some of Johnny's, some of his. and they just picked out, you know, that one as being the most interesting one to put on the album. I think it wasn't specifically chosen for any great reason. I don't think it was just one of them probably said, "Oh, I like Girl from the North Country. Let's do that."
When the river's free and summer ends, please see for me if she's wearing a coat so warm to keep her from the howling wind.
Nashville Skyline was one of the most daring things in Dylan's career, which puts up with a lot of other daring things. But at the time Nashville Skyline came out, it was redneck country music. It was despised by Dylan's large audience. It was seen as music for people with extremely right-wing views and, at very best, Southern States of America drinking songs. This is not, of course, what country music is about, but that's how it was seen. I'm just saying that's how it was seen at the time. And for Dylan, of all people, to produce a country album was quite a leap.
And of course, in the years following that, it turned out that that, again, was just a pivotal album that changed the course of music history. Because most country rockers hadn't actually listened to country music until Nashville Skyline came out. And so you could say that that was like the seed for everything like the Eagles and all those country rock people that came through in the 70s.
Well, she once was a true love of mine.
And he then made New Morning and Self-Portrait close together, and then he kind of vanished. He seemed to retreat into his home in Woodstock. He was having children with his wife. I think he was waiting for his contract with his manager Albert Grossman to expire. So for a period of, you know, roughly from 1970 to 1973-4, he vanished. He didn't seem to exist anymore. There were rumours about him, but nobody knew what he was doing, what he was thinking. He didn't play live. He didn't release any music. And then he made this comeback. He came back with a big tour. It was something like, you know, 25 cities. And he made this new album, Planet Waves.
Well, the thing about Planet Waves is really that the gap between New Morning and Planet Waves was unprecedented. The thing about Planet Waves is that essentially the sessions didn't take place until they'd announced the tour. And the demand for the tour was unprecedented. Probably even to this day, there isn't a comparable tour in terms of the level of expectation. I mean, something like 18 million ticket applications for a tour in 1974. Again, totally unheard of. I mean, you know, I think you're talking, what, 2% of the population? I mean, it's a staggering amount of people. And at that point, they kind of realised that actually the fact that he's been away hasn't actually affected his commerciality in any really significant way.
So Dylan was the hottest property that had been live in America to that point. So the album, I'm not saying was guaranteed to go to #1, but you can imagine there was a tremendous hype at the time. It was an album that had tremendous peaks of writing and musicianship from the band, but it was recorded at great speed very quickly. So a song may start with some of the most beautiful lyrics Dylan had put down in many a year, but then might lapse a little bit, shall we say, if one wants to be critical. But it's a much loved album amongst Dylan fans. It's a very warm feeling amongst Dylan fans for it.
Planet Waves is another kind of perfunctory Dylan record. And he basically went away and lived a normal life, a normal family life, making music at his own pace, living on a farm, and just trying to have as normal a life as he could, away from the spotlight. And that did Dylan a lot of good. But, you know, does a happy life make for good art? I think, certainly in his case, I don't think it does.
Earlier you'd asked about Dylan's early 70s output being disappointing to fans. One of the reasons, and this is quite sad really, one of the reasons was that Dylan was happy. He was happily married and he was happily living with his children, which doesn't make for great art. Planet Waves had similar songs of great love for his wife, and the life they had together, but also had hints of trouble and discord and possible tensions, which obviously are much more evident in Blood on the Tracks. What is also very important is that the best writing for me on Planet Waves is Dylan's memories of his youth and looking back, which is something that Dylan had resolutely not done in the 60s. But there are wonderful lines about twilight on the frozen lake and the old hills of Duluth and memories, beautifully put. And Blood on the Tracks is very much, although it's a timeless album, is very much Dylan looking to his past and the past of the generation that had grown up listening to his music.
But you can see the seeds of the themes of Blood on the Tracks in it, especially in the song Dirge, which is a very grim song that starts, "I hate myself for loving you." And you think, what's going on here? Is there something wrong with his marriage? And yet there was another song on that album called Wedding Song, which seemed to be a song in praise of his wife. And you thought, there's something odd going on here. He seems to be torn between this devotion and there's also, he feels that there's something holding him back in the marriage.
When Dylan starts saying, "I love you more than all of that with a love that never bends, and if there is eternity, I'll love you there again," it really does sound like he's trying way too hard to convince his wife that that's the case. And it is pretty clear that Dylan was trying to get his wife to reconcile herself with the idea of him going back on the road. Now, Sarah was no idiot. She knew what had happened in '66 when Dylan went on the road, and she certainly didn't want that to happen again. And she was quite correctly unhappy. Again, with hindsight, when we see what happens on the tour, she was perfectly correct in their fears. That if Dylan went back on the road, that he would revert to that whole lifestyle that he'd had previously.
And I come home with you, baby, can I come home with you? Well, I'll do anything in this God Almighty world if you just let me come home with you.
The band had achieved great prominence in their own right, with music from Big Pink and their second album. They had become one of the leading bands in America. So Dylan and the band went out on the road and they soldiered around and they did these very kind of heavy, kind of loud versions of their songs, which was released as a double album called Before the Flood. But to my ears, it sounded slightly uninspired. It sounded like he was going through the motions. He wanted to be on the road, he wanted to be playing with the band, but it was all kind of thump, thump, thump. It all sounded a bit like he was sort of working to a formula. So sort of by 1974, it was very hard to know who Bob Dylan was. He'd done so many things so quickly. Who knows who Bob Dylan was? And then he came back with this album, Blood on the Tracks.
Early one morning the sun was shining, she was lying in bed, wondering if she changed it all, if her hair was still red. If folks, they said their lives together sure was gonna be rough. They never did like Mama's homemade dress, Papa's bank book wasn't big enough. And he was standing on the side of the road, rain falling on his shoes, heading out for the East Coast. Lord knows he paid some dues, getting through, tangled up in blue.
Nobody expected him to make another great album. People had just given up, thinking, well, he's not going to do it again. His time was the 60s.
For all of his commercial profile and for all of the undoubted impact and influence that he'd had on the music being made in 1974, the reality was he'd been written off as a serious, credible, creative artist. To use as an analogy, Dylan was at exactly the same stage in his career as Muhammad Ali before the George Foreman fight. He'd been considered the greatest, but he was now considered an 8-to-1 outsider.
This album is the album that you would take to your grave with you, And I think this is the album that if you were to say, yeah, this is the one Bob Dylan album that I'll play you to show you what Bob Dylan's about, this is the one you'd take. Even though there's more adventurous albums out there by Dylan musically, There's more druggy albums, there's more abstract albums. This is the album that you would say, yeah, this is, if I was to play you a record by Bob Dylan to show you what this was really about, the essence of what this is about, is Blood on the Tracks.
I think the record is a classic, and you know, why classics happen is very hard to put your finger on. It's like, you know, why do classic films happen? Why did Casablanca happen? Why did The Third Man happen? You know, there's a great script, there are great actors, there's a great cameraman, there's great lighting. It all comes together, and I feel that with this album, all the themes, it's unusually coherent. The album keeps circling round and round and round the central mystery of relationships and what love is and whether we ever find true love. And if we think we find it, how it always goes wrong. And yet, you know, that is what we do. That's what our journey through life is. It's always looking for that other half of you that will complete you. And so it's the coherence of the material, and it's the sympathetic musicians, and the fact that I think he is singing in a very direct, down-to-earth way that makes it a very coherent album, and an album that lasts. And yet people didn't hear it that way at the time. I think John Landau in Rolling Stone had a fairly negative review of it. I think Nick Kent in the NME said that it sounded amateurish. It just shows people don't quite know what they're getting when they get a new Dylan album.
There was only one review that called it right, and it's rare for me to compliment the man who wrote it, but Michael Gray in Let It Rock absolutely got it spot on. He said, this is a masterpiece, this rewrites the book, and most importantly, the one thing that Michael got absolutely right, he said, Dylan has done something that no one has done before, which is 10 years after he was written off, he has delivered something at least the equal of his incredible work. And that is unprecedented. I think even to this day, I don't think anybody has done that. You know, there's no Rolling Stones album after Exile that comes close. There's no Beatles album that, you know, you get into the whole thing. Dylan did it, and nobody saw it coming.
She turned around to look at him as he was walking away, saying over her shoulder, we'll meet again someday on the avenue, tangled up in blue.
Tangled Up in Blue is one of my favourite songs of all time, let alone one of my favourite Dylan songs. That to me is the, you know, the ultimate Dylan song, Tangled Up in Blue. I listen to it and I've got films going around in my head. The imagery is so incredibly strong and it's such a poignant song. And I started listening to that when I was 12 years old. I wouldn't have had a clue about relationships, broken hearts, girls. And I can just remember hearing this record, and it was like having a film coming out of the speakers. It's because the imagery in the album is so strong, and the imagery in that song is just incredible. Actually, it's mesmerizing.
She was working in a topless place, and I stopped in for a beer. I just kept looking at the side of her face and the spotlight so clear. And later on, when the girl thinned out, I was just about to do the same. She was standing there right beside my chair, said, don't tell me, let me guess your name. I muttered something underneath my breath. She studied the lines of my face. Must admit, felt a little uneasy when she bent down to tie the laces of my shoes, tangled up in blue.
I think Tangled Up in Blue sets the stage. It tells you what the theme of the album is. And it's a fantastic, there's something kind of very up-tempo and very kind of energetic about it. It's just the way Dylan and the musicians work together, the way the drums work, the way you get that little rinky-dink, ding figure on the guitar. It just keeps, it's wonderful the way it just keeps circling around. It keeps circling around and coming back to itself. Each verse sort of seems to build on the same theme. It's got this wonderful circular feel to it, which musically goes with what the lyrics are telling you. The love doesn't end in some kind of happy stasis, that it always ends either in separation or in reconciliation. You're always moving on to the next stage. Nothing lasts forever. A lot of the time with Dylan albums, there is a song that sets the scene. I mean, on Highway 61 Revisited, it was like a Rolling Stone that sort of told you what the album was about and what it was going to sound like. And I think on Blonde, it's Visions of Joanna that kind of sums up the album. For me, Blood on the Tracks begins with Tangled Up in Blue, and that tells you what the theme of the album is.
Tangled Up in Blue is probably most Dylan fans' favourite single song, though to get anyone to pick one is always very difficult. If you really forced me, it would be the one I'd pick. and I think it's most people's signature song from the album, Blood on the Tracks. But Tangled Up in Blue is such a perfect realisation, even though Dylan was constantly rewriting it and would constantly rewrite it in forthcoming years. It was such a perfect realisation of the album, summing up where Dylan was, where the world was, what was happening, and the whole feel of it, and just the way it opens the album just makes it perfect for most Dylan fans.
So now I'm going on back again, I got to get to them somehow. All the faces we used to know, they're an illusion to me now. Some are mathematicians, some are truck drivers' wives. Don't know how it all got started, I don't know what they're doing with their lives. But me, I'm still on the road, heading for another joint. We always did feel the same, we just saw it from a different point of view. Tangled up in blue.
A major part of Blood on the Tracks is about aesthetics and about art. It's commonly thought of as just an album about the breakup of his marriage, but it's actually more about the problems that an artist has to go through in order to realise his art, and the divisions that creates within their personal life. There are, time and again throughout the album, there are references or hints at actually having to do something or reveal something or processes which go against the personal life, which are betrayals of the personal life. And there are also references to people not understanding what the artist has to go through, which presumably in this case means his wife not actually really understanding what he was going through in that period.
They sat together in the park as the evening sky got dark. She looked at him and he felt a spark tingle to his bones. First lady felt alone and wished that he'd gone straight and watched out for a simple twist of fate.
We do keep talking about the unity of the album, but in fact the musical styles and the emphasis changes, especially in the opening 4 tracks. The move from Tangled Up in Blue, and you have to cast your mind back to what a thrill that was to have Dylan back at that power at the time, and in those days of vinyl, of course, you get this little break and you're thinking of Tangled Up in Blue, and suddenly Simple Twist of Fate starts.
A clarinet someplace softly played. She was walking on by the arcade. She heard the melody rise and fade.
Other Dylan albums, there are often things that sound allegorical, or things that sound political, or things that sound like dreams, whereas every song on Blood on the Tracks is telling you a story. It's a story about a man and a woman and how they make it and how they don't make it. It's telling you that love is wonderful and love is a sense of loss at the same time.
He woke up and she was gone. He didn't see nothing but the dawn. He got out of bed and put his clothes back on. Pushed back the blind. Found a note she'd left behind, to which he just could not relate. All about a simple twist of fate.
I don't think that Blood on the Tracks is Dylan's greatest album as a vocalist. I think it's one of his greatest albums as a vocalist, but there are better examples if you actually want to talk about that remarkable genius he has for using his voice. I've written elsewhere that Blood on the Tracks uses the voices from the post-accident albums in a way that suggests that he needed to go through all of those to get to this point. So he needed to make Nashville, Skyline, he needed to make New Morning, he needed to make Planet Waves, none of which are great albums, in order to get to Blood on the Tracks. And there is definitely a sense of that he's bringing together all those different voices in Blood on the Tracks. And because he actually confines himself musically on the album by using this open D tuning throughout most of the album, and so he's actually limiting himself musically, and he's using very little backing. He actually has to do things with his voice to make it interesting.
It seems to me his voice is more natural on this album than on many of his other albums. I mean, on Blonde, you hear this extraordinary strung out voice, which is like strung out through like not sleeping for 24 hours or strung out on amphetamines, or very strung out, very strange intonations. Whereas the voice on Blood on the Tracks really is kind of, it's quite mature, and it seems to me, it feels like it's talking to you one-to-one. And there was a guy who wrote sleeve notes in the album, a guy called Peter Hamill, I think, and he ends up in his sleeve notes on the album saying something like, there's this man and he's coming across the fields and he's walking into the courtyard and he's got a guitar on his back and he's telling you stories. And he's not the leader of a guitar album and he's not the prophet Isaiah. He's a troubadour. He's a man with a guitar who tells you stories. And I think that's a very good evocation of what the album feels like. It's a man who's been on the road, who's experienced a lot of things, but it's him and his guitar and he's telling you stories. And it's quite a mature voice, and it doesn't sound... I don't think he does do many tricks with intonation, or many strange drawn-out phrases, or many sort of strangled vowels, the sort of way people parody Dylan when they do Dylan impersonations. It sounds to me like it's, quite a warm, direct voice.
Dylan fans en masse, as it were, will always defend his voice. It's one of the things that most annoys Dylan fans, is that everybody thinks Dylan can't sing. Whereas Dylan fans think what he does is so good it goes beyond singing. And what Dylan does for me, and for those of us who do love his voice, is that he can communicate emotion at a level that is hard, well, in fact impossible to put into other words. The argument about Dylan being a poet never really stands up, because if you were to read some of the lines that we're talking about in this documentary, they wouldn't read as great poetry. To hear them sung by Dylan, they do. And given the fact that Dylan is always consciously working in a pop, folk, blues, pop format, there are many cliched lines, there are many what one might even call trite lines. And what rescues them from this is either their context beside the other half of the couplet or the beginning of the line that is unexpected and makes you think about a cliche in a new way. But over and above all of that, over and above all the writing, is Dylan's voice. And it's his voice on Blood on the Tracks throughout it, from the very beginning to the very end, that is so deft and in control of the light moments, the dark moments, and especially of the pull between different emotions.
Song about vengeance, about anger, about cursing someone who he has fallen out with.
He's the kind of guy that would be writing songs if he wasn't getting paid for it. I think songs are very much a form of catharsis for him. So, this isn't really about career, this isn't really about money, this is about helping himself. It's like a self-help group, For a one-man self-help group, I think that, Bob Dylan's always worked out his issues and his, the questions in his life through his music.
It's got this extraordinary beginning. Someone's got an infamy they're planting stories in the press who everybody says, I wish to kill it out quick, because when they were like any guess. It's very interesting in terms of Dylan, because Dylan, of course, was always surrounded by rumours. There were strange rumours about him always circulating in the press, and it's as if it begins as if he's cursing the press, but then he goes on to cursing this woman, and you're an idiot, babe. It's a wonder that you still know how to breathe. It is, quite a breathtaking thing to say to some woman who you once shared your life with. It's a wonder that you still know how to breathe. It is an amazing act of contempt. Is a catharsis of a song that certainly would become the angriest thing Dylan had ever recorded.
And if you listen to Blood on the Tracks itself, you might put it down as one of his angriest songs, but it was to become much angrier.
The live performance of Idiot Wind on the Hard Rain TV special is a totally unique circumstance. He is singing that song. Sara is 2 foot from him when he's singing that. She's in the pit, literally in front of him. And they've been having blazing rows for the previous 5 days for a variety of reasons. And so here is a song that he wrote 2 years earlier, which is about that dynamic. And of course, the woman he wrote the song about is there. Of course, he gives it 110%. And it's an extraordinary performance because of that. But he is seething.
I've said before that I think Idiot Wind is like the engine of the album, and everything spirals round it. And the anger and pain and close to the bone feeling of Idiot Wind, one could listen to You're a Big Girl Now, where he talks about, he's talking very close to the bone. You're talking about naked emotion and pain. Not long after the album came out, Dylan did an interview with Mary Travers, where he said that he couldn't understand people responding to the pain that was on the album. For somebody who's denied that, of course, there's any autobiographical element in it, that was a very interesting remark. What I think he does with the pain, and Idiot Wind is one where we perhaps have to take what I'm going to say on faith. I think he transmutes the pain into something that is almost a feeling of freedom. The very fact that somebody can articulate something so hurtful makes me as a listener get a buzz and an adrenaline rush, not because I want to wallow in the pain of another human being, but the fact that somebody can articulate something so personal and make it sound universal, I think is a great achievement. But if you're going to talk about albums and particular tracks that get too close to the bone and are uncomfortable to listen to, well, certainly Idiot Wind is the one that would come to mind as being a little bit too close to somebody else's life or comfort.
You'll never know the hurt I suffered, nor the pain I rise above. And I'll never know the same about you, your holiness or your kind of love. And it makes me feel so sorry.
It's got an emotional movement in it because it begins, you're an idiot, babe, it's a wonder that you still know how to breathe. And it ends, we are idiots, babe, it's a wonder we can even feed ourselves. So that movement from you're an idiot to we are idiots seems to me, there's a kind of coming to terms with it all. There's a kind of sense of, not a reconciliation, but a kind of understanding that whatever it was, whatever the mess was, they created it together. It was something they both shared. So just by going from that accusatory tone at the beginning to we're idiots, babe, there's a kind of sense of forgiveness or a sense of coming to terms with it. And yet it has got other dimensions. I think when he's singing, Idiot Wind blowing like a circle around my skull from the Grand Coulee Dam to the Capitol, that to me reminds me of when it was recorded. It was recorded, 1974. That was actually the year Nixon resigned. That was the year of Watergate. So it becomes the whole wind of political rumour, the whole wind of the idiotic American media. It becomes something that's political, that's media, that's personal. It's a quite extraordinary image that somehow encompasses all these worlds.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
It's a wonder that you still know how to breathe.
A&R Studios, as it was in 1974, was the old CBS Studio A. In the 60s, Dylan had recorded all of the great masterpieces that he was known for. Everything from Bob Dylan to Highway 61 was recorded at CBS Studio A. in New York. CBS no longer owned that studio, or if they did, it was no longer their studio per se. It was A&R studio by 1974, and very few people were using it. I mean, people of Dylan's stature were using it because it was an old studio. It had old technology, but Dylan very much wanted to use that studio. Because he wanted whatever that magic was that could be found in the studio.
There was a deliberate folksy feel to the album, which reminded Dylan fans of his earlier incarnation. Now, musical techniques and musical styles had changed a lot, so it's not like one is listening to Bob Dylan in 1962. But there is a deliberate attempt to recapture a folksy feel. You've got to remember this is the man who outraged everyone by turning electric and had since outraged them by going country, and he returned to a folksy feel. He actually returned to the Columbia A&R studios where he'd recorded his early 60s folk albums. So there was a deliberate and conscious going back to the past and talking about the present.
The theme of looking back is there throughout the album, and Studio A was part of that.
Everything one hears about Dylan is that he likes to do it in 1 or 2 takes. He doesn't like to hang around. He likes to sit down with a bunch of musicians, play the song through, and then get it. He believes in spontaneity. He believes in there being something that you can't recapture. A lot of his recordings have been like that. And his classic albums have happened when he's walked into the studio with a bunch of songs and a bunch of musicians who for some reason have just connected. Dylan recorded this album twice. He recorded it in New York. The story is that he played the tapes to his brother David, and David said, "It doesn't sound right, you ought to come to Minneapolis and do it again with some musicians I know in a studio I can hire." For some reason Dylan did it. He went to Minneapolis, and when he went to Minneapolis it changed. And I think one thing you can hear Dylan thinking is he's perhaps worrying that the tracks are too similar. They're in the same key, they're in the same tempo. He's getting the idea there's got to be more variety in the tempo, there's got to be a bit more energy in it. And I think you feel that very strongly in Tangled Up in Blue. I mean, the energy of the Minneapolis musicians is wonderful. I think it kicks the song off. It gives it a kind of circular motion. It gives it a kind of sense of being on the road, which really suits the song.
Of any writer, songs are the basic currency. It's, and it's something that's forgotten in this day and age. It's not about studios, it's not about musicianship, it's not about atmosphere, it's not about sex, drugs and rock and roll, it's not about image. Ultimately, what this whole business is about is songs. And Dylan already had the songs, and it was just a question of finding a sympathetic group of musicians who could translate what it was he was hearing in his head that he hadn't been able to capture before.
In another lifetime, when I'm trying in blood, like it was a virtue, the road was full of mud. I came in from the wilderness, a creature void of form. She said, "I'll give ya shelter from the storm."
We have been talking about how deeply personal Blood on the Tracks is, and Shelter from the Storm is another song of tremendous turmoil in the area of relationships and love. But one of the things that most songs do, and this one does to the nth degree, to use a cliche, is that it universalises the personal.
I think Shelter from the Storm is one of the most beautiful love songs ever written. It's this wonderful image of somehow this relationship, this thing will bring you shelter from whatever life can hurl at you. Life will hurl shit at you, things will go wrong, politics will go wrong, your career will go wrong. There is this place where it's always safe and warm. And that's, the dream people have of finding this place which will always give them shelter. No matter what happens to them outside, there'll always be this warm cave. And it's got this rather beautiful, self-conscious biblical imagery. She came up to me so gracefully and took my crown of thorns. It's Dylan playing a joke about himself as the Jesus figure.
But the song is built out of the same terrible sense of separation that is at the heart of You're a Big Girl Now and Idiot Wind. But Dylan is consciously doing it as a myth. The female in this is a goddess with the power to save him, to give him shelter from the storm. He himself is a creature devoid of form.
That's a fantastic image. I mean, what is a creature void of form? I mean, even Hieronymus Bosch couldn't paint a creature void of form. And at another point he sings, you know, ravaged like the crocodile hunted in the corn. I mean, the idea that people are hunting crocodiles in a cornfield is such a strange image, but at the same time it's an image of, you know, the mad beast that is looking for some escape, and she will give him shelter from the storm.
Suddenly I turned around and she was standing there with silver bracelets on her wrist and flowers in her hair. She walked up to me so gracefully, took my crown of thorns, and then she said, I'll give you shelter from the storm.
At the end he said, in a little hilltop village they gamble for my clothes, which again reminds me of the moment of Christ's crucifixion when the soldiers are playing dice because they can't part his clothes. So again there's the image of Dylan as Christ-like, and the final crucifixion, or the final deliverance is somehow there in the images, and it's not done in a big way or a pretentious way. It's just a kind of throwaway line that reminds you of all kinds of biblical allegories and biblical parables. And he lands up, you know, as I say, with the direct parallels to the Jesus Christ story where people are gambling for his clothes. It's almost ridiculous, but there's such an authority in his voice and there's such a pain in it that he carries it off.
In a little hilltop village, they gamble for my clothes. I'm begging for salvation, they give me a lethal dose. I offered up my innocence, got me paid with scorn. And then she said, I'll give you shelter from the storm.
I think part of the reason it comes off so well is because of the setting in the album. If one had suddenly been presented in 1975 with Shelter from the Storm on its own, I'm not sure how one could react to it. It's such a mythic statement. But on an album that's full of stories of men and women and lovers united, reunited, lost, reconnected, the mythic gets its core from all these people we've heard of in topless bars, driving cars, normal people in normal places, suffering great emotion.
Dylan's writing by this point had become a lot less oblique. It was a lot more confessional, a lot more direct. I think there was less open to interpretation. In the 60s, there was a lot more clever wordplay and a lot more kind of art involved. Whereas these songs, they are like a chronicle of his life. You know, they are Dylan's diaries in song. And they're really, Dylan's son, Jacob, has said, Blood on the Tracks is like his parents talking to each other. I can't think of a better way of describing that record. It chronicles the breakup of his marriage, and, you know, everything started falling apart basically for him. I mean, the biographical assumption everybody makes about Blood on the Tracks is that it's about Dylan's marriage breaking up. And we know that his marriage did hit the rocks, and we know that his wife Sara got divorced a year or two later. And it clearly is an album that coincides with the break of his marriage, but I think it's too reductive to say Dylan broke up with his wife, so he wrote these songs. It's probably the experience of like trying to keep your marriage together and then losing it makes you understand all sorts of things about the dimensions of love, of relationships, what it is that lasts and why things don't last, and that gives it a kind of emotional vividness, which is possibly unusual in Dylan. I mean, Dylan is a master of metaphor, he's a master of disguise, he's always changing his voice, he's always changing his image. But in this album, he feels like he's right there, he's in the room with you, and he's just telling you stories about what happened to him and why it was beautiful and why it went wrong.
With Blood on the Tracks, everyone remembers the pain of love and the difficulties of separation and anguish and all these kinds of dark emotions. But it wouldn't actually work as an album if there weren't a whole range of emotions associated with love involved, whether implicitly or explicitly. And clearly, Dylan has connected with millions of people, a feeling that he's dealing with these concepts in a mature manner that was just unknown in popular music. And the sort of complexities of love, I think, are very evident in the album. And I think also there's probably many a man who's lost a woman who goes home late at night and puts the album on and cries himself to sleep with it. It's certainly, not myself obviously, but it certainly probably had that effect on many people. So it does have that, but I think that trivialises it to a near despicable level, actually. Although that element is definitely there in the album, definitely there often in Dylan. Relationships, Dylan, usually comes out with a very manly viewpoint, shall we say, that men can equate to. But I think the album connects to both men and women, and I think it does so because it deals not just with pain and any kind of maudlin self-pity, but also with overcoming that, and also with the whole range of the human emotion that's involved in relationships and how difficult they are.
The problem you always get into with Dylan, and it's a problem that there are very, very few rock critics ever overcome. And they always feel very self-conscious when they do, is that it is frankly absurd to talk about anybody else in the same terms. Now I say this as someone who's written biographies on quite a few artists, written histories of various strands of rock music that Dylan has no connection with. Dylan overarches everything, and there is nobody that comes close to Dylan. I once did a radio show in Australia, and the woman was stunned when I said, you can't seriously put Paul McCartney in the same league as Bob Dylan. I say this as a fan of the Beatles, I say this as a fan of McCartney's work, but it's absurd, it is frankly ridiculous. And I've interviewed hundreds of musicians over the years, and almost every one of them, whether they're punks, post-punks, grunge, there isn't one you won't meet who doesn't realise that. Musicians realise there is Dylan and there is everybody else.